Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Here we go. Let's go live for about an hour. Have a little fun, chit chat, talk about ponds and lakes and stuff. Hey everybody, Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, checking in with you on this Tuesday evening. Looks like we have 0 viewers. Hey, come on folks, pile in. Pile in, pile on. Let's go talk, have a little bit of pond talk. So I'm going to give it a couple of minutes and make sure that, yeah, it looks like we're live. So, you know what, I'm going to talk. I know nobody's watching, but I'm going to talk anyway. So, I wonder if I'm on the right page. I know I'm on the right page. Yeah, I'm on the right page. So anyway, here we go. I want to talk a little bit about all the fundamentals about pond management and see if we can take part of those and pick it apart. So I'm going to start off talking about, for you, those of you that know me and have listened to me for years and years and years, or a couple of days, there's 5 concepts that I talk about pond management. And each one's pretty simple when you start looking at it from 30,000 feet. So it's water, happy water. I call it happy water. If your water's not happy, none of these other things matter. The second thing is the right kind of habitat. And my little catchphrase there is, as goes the habitat, so goes what lives in it. And if you got habitat that's conducive for production of big bass, you're going to grow big bass. The fish population is a consequence of all these things I'm getting ready to tell you. So happy water, habitat, then there's the food chain. So at each trophic level of the food chain, starting at the bottom, which is plankton, the energy conversion is about 10 to 1 because all this stuff's wet. There's a lot of water in it. So it takes about 10 pounds of bait fish for a bass to gain a pound until that bass gets up a little bit bigger, like 4 or 5 pounds. Hello, Danny Mac. Good to see you, brother. Great day for golf it was. Well, I hope you got to go play around. You got to go, hope you shot well, so to speak. So as the bass gets bigger, it takes a lot more food. And I thought I'm going to kind of drill down into some of these concepts until you guys start pitching a few questions out there. The next piece is genetics. If we've got good genetics, you're going to have good growth. Now that doesn't mean that we want Florida genetics in every state of the union. We want good genetics for where you live. Then the last piece is a good harvest plan. Look at a pond like a garden. At some point, you're going to need to harvest something. So that's the concepts. Happy water, habitat, food chain, genetics, and harvest. Let's start off with happy water. Just what is happy water? This is happy water right here. There's nothing in it except ice, which I guess is water. No, I'm not going to guess. I know it. So what is happy water in a pond? Here's something very interesting. I don't know if you know this or not, but pure water, and Danny Mac knows this. Hello, Steve Scharf. Good to see you, buddy. Danny Mac knows this. He's an engineer. I mean, he's like a brilliant freaking rocket scientist guy. That guy's brain just is stronger than a locomotive. I don't know if he can leap a tall building anymore, but it might not be 1 bound or it might be 2 bounds. But anyway, pure distilled water is an insulator. Electricity doesn't flow through it. But it's the stuff that's dissolved in the water that makes it conductive for electricity, and that's also what makes the water happy. So when you got the right stuff dissolved in the water, it helps make a more productive pond. So if we've got good mineral content, the right kind of metals, and the water absorbs what it does or dissolves what it does, either from the soils or the air as it falls down in the form of rain. So when it contacts limestone, it dissolves lime. It gets calcium carbonate. Hey, there's Donna McFarland. Holy cow, good to see you, girl. Brian Epting, good to see you. There's Fred Bingaman. Fred remembers the deal. He just reminded me. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like, share this to your timeline so we can build an audience, and you're going to be eligible for a drawing for a Bird Dog Cup. I tried to find my bird dog cup. I don't know where it went, so I'm stuck with this one. But right after the show last Tuesday, I called Jonathan and said, hey, dude, you want to donate a couple of bird dog cups for a drawing? He said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. So next time I see him, I'll get a couple of cups, and we'll have a drawing and see who wins one. Hashtag Pond Balls Magazine, click like, share to your timeline, and you're eligible for a drawing for a bird dog cup. And heck, I tell you what, we'll even throw in a Pond Boss hat to go with it, if that motivates you to share it. So anyway, Happy Water is got the right kind of minerals, which is calcium carbonate, or in a lot of cases is calcium bicarbonate, which is baking soda. It's got usually some iron, which we don't care if it's got that or not, but as long as the water has got the right nutrient content and the right minerals and metals, that's what makes it happy. Now, keep in mind, as we're talking about water, water has an innate ability to absorb and dissolve everything it can. Everything from, like I said a while ago, minerals to even pieces of a Volkswagen if it's left in there long enough. And because of that, the water is kind of a vehicle to allow productivity to occur within itself. So happy water is water that is consistent. It's, I don't want to use the word autonomous, but that's a good way to look at it, where it's got all the healthy things dissolved in it. Now, that doesn't mean you can drink it. It may have stuff in there that you don't need. Danny Mac, I intend to hit Overton's Marketing on a Saturday morning soon, but then I have a 260-mile trip home, assuming I average 60. Are oxygen stuffed bags sufficient? Yeah, just tell those guys what you're doing and where you're going. And I tell you what I would do, depending on the kind of fish you're buying, I would take along some 5-gallon buckets and let them set the bag down in the bucket, air it up in the bucket, and then you're less likely for it to get punctured. But if they know you're going to have a 5-hour ride, they'll put the right amount of fish in there, and where they'll live long. Hello, Kenny Sanderson, good to see you, buddy. John Moore, good to see you. So back to the Happy Water. Happy Water has the ability to absorb oxygen, to absorb dissolved oxygen, because water's got oxygen in it just because it's water, H2O, right? So as long as it's got a healthy amount of oxygen, the pH doesn't fluctuate. It's got alkalinity that's greater than 40 parts per million. That's the beginnings of having happy water. And 35 years ago, hell, I guess this is 2024. Yeah, maybe 30 years ago, there were no aeration systems on this market. That's all been in my lifetime, maybe not yours, but recent. I can remember a long time ago when there was no such thing as pond aeration. The only time you saw aeration was in wastewater treatment. You saw these big old paddle wheels churning that wastewater up, and the water kind of had a brown color to it for some reason. Sorry. And that was the beginning to start to cleanse that water so they can release it into the creek, which goes to the river, which goes to the lake. And so with that point, the water's got an amazing ability to cleanse itself, and that's one of my favorite things about water. Water is the lifeblood. And then the second piece is habitat. I looked at a lake yesterday that the guy's building up west of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I ran up west of Tulsa yesterday, and he's doing a great job on it. And his question for me was, what do we need to do to finish the habitat? Well, he had a lot of the elements already in place. He had good slopes. Looked like a bomb went off in the bottom of that thing, and that's exactly what I want. He had a bunch of channels and mounds, and the bulldozer guy, and they did it. They have all those cuts and things because they were trying to harvest clay everywhere they could find it to build the dam. So the dozer guy wanted to come in and smooth it out and dress it up, and he said, no, let's don't do that, and I concur. So now they're getting ready to add habitat. Now, a lot of guys that build a lake, they understand what bass need to live. But what they don't think about is going back to that comment I made earlier about the food chain. It takes 10 pounds of bait fish for a bass to gain its first pound. So you got to have the right kind of habitat for little bitty fish too. Itty bitty teeny tiny ones, little bitty guys like that. So when I'm designing a habitat plan, which I do a lot of that nowadays, then you need to be able to think about all the different sizes of the different species of fish that you're going to stock. So if you're going to stock like a typical bass bluegill pond with fathead minnows, bluegills, red ear sunfish, and then the largemouth bass, you want to have the right kind of habitat with spawning beds. I like to call it an underwater community where you've got spawning beds, and then just adjacent to that, you've got some structure that's dense, like big rock piles or mossback fish habitat's good. Cedar trees, they don't last long, and if you use cedar trees, stand them up. Take an auger, drill a hole, plant them in the hole, and compact it where they're standing up. If they fall over, they'll collapse and be gone within 2.5 to 3 years. You know, and then the next piece is genetics, food chain. Happy water, habitat, food chain. So you want to be able to look at it like this. You're going to provide the right kind of habitat for the different life stages of all these different species of fish that you want to have in your pond. So when you do that, you're going to be able to preserve enough bait fish to allow them to get big enough that they're significant or more significant in the food chain. So you want fish that can reproduce, you know, like bluegills reproduce in Texas anywhere from 4 to 5 times a year. Kansas maybe 3 times a year where Kenny Sanderson lives, you know, and so on. Genetics, pick the best genetics for your region, not necessarily the best genetics for what you read about that might grow the biggest fish on the planet, because they might not work in northern New Mexico where there's still snow on the ground. You know, so do that. The fifth piece is a harvest plan. And the cool thing about a harvest plan, like I mentioned earlier, look at your pond like a garden. You're going to stock it, nurture it, manage it, you know, feed the fish, maybe fertilize your happy water, whatever you need to do. And at some point, you're going to have a bounty. And if you don't harvest it, nature will. And Adam Harkness is adding his question, how much damage do otters do to a 65 to 70 acre lake? A lot. They can do a lot. I'll tackle that here in a minute. John says, will hybrid striped bass help with gizzard shad in a 3.5 acre pond in central Kentucky? Yes, they will. Now, the thing about gizzard shad in a 3.5 acre pond, I can't imagine you would have a lot of pounds, but what I can imagine is you could have some really big ones. So gizzard shad actually have kind of a short lifespan. 3 or 4 years is pretty typical. If they make it to 3 or 4 years old, they're going to weigh 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds. So it takes a pretty big fish to inhale one of those big suckers. Now, the thing about a 3.5 acre pond, you might be able to, might be a little late in the year. They have a tendency to want to collect around docks or in areas where they'll school up those big fish, and they'll all be the same size, which is pretty cool. And you can take a cast net and catch a bunch of them and remove them that way. But if you've got a lot of gizzard shad in a 3.5 acre pond in central Kentucky, hybrid striped bass can help with that. You just got to keep in mind how big the mouth of that hybrid striper needs to have to be able to eat the gizzard shad that you've got. So you may want to do several things, like try to harvest some with a seine or throw a cast net on some of them and get some of them out. Let's go back to Adam. Hello, Gil Cannonberg. Good to see you, buddy. Thanks for checking in. How much damage can otters do to a 65 to 70 acre? They can do a lot. And matter of fact, Donna McFarland is watching this show, and I remember her husband, Bob. They've got a 6 acre lake over in northeast Texas, and Bob called me a few years ago, and he says, oh my gosh, we've got a couple of otters out there. They get out and play, and Donna loves those things. And will they do any damage? And I said, yeah, they will. What they like to do is in the wintertime when the bass are sluggish, especially bassing, catfish, it doesn't matter what kind of fish. It can be 2-pound gizzard shad. But in Bob and Donna's case, they had bass and bluegill. And I told Bob then, I said, yeah, you need to shoot those otters. He says, oh, but they're so cute. Donna loves them. I said, well, let's see how much you love it when that bass drags up about a 6-pound bass on your dock and in the middle of the night eats the guts out of it and leaves the rest for you. And he kind of chuckled about that. And I don't know, Donna, if you're still watching, I don't know how long it took, maybe 6 months. And Bob called me back. He said, you know those otters we had? And I said, yeah. He said, Donna shot them. They did that. They pulled a big bass. They were pulling big bass. Hello, Todd Austin. There's Jim Allen checking in from Kentucky. We got 2 Kentucky guys on here tonight. That's great. So bring me some more questions. Let's do that. Yeah, see, look at Donna. See, she's watching. When you're right, you're right. Yeah, hey, Donna, you know what? Nolan, our little Nolan, is 19 years old, graduated from high school. He is in the Air Force. I know you're going to say, what? Yeah, it happened fast. It did. That's one of our 13 grandkids. He's the second oldest one. His big brother, Ethan, is also in the Air Force. And those guys are pretty proud of him. It's working out pretty good. Matter of fact, Donna and Nolan were on the cover of Palm Boss when Nolan was probably, I don't know, 3 years old. We took him down there, and Donna had these cool little stomp rockets, and I framed the picture where Donna was sitting on her back deck with Nolan, and Nolan had his arms spread out wide watching that rocket go up in the air when they stomped it. Yeah, he's a good boy. He sure is. And Donna, when you're right, you're right. Yeah, you're right. That's right. So pitch me some questions. Otherwise, I'm going to keep chattering about all these different principles. You know, the food chain. You know, here's something that's real important. Each one of these topics, you can take each one of those and drill way down deep into it, and it can get really complicated as you start trying to see how all these things interact. How happy water interacts to influence the habitat. How it influences the food chain, how the food chain is influenced by the habitat, and how the habitat influences genetics. All these things interact. And if you take each piece of this and start kind of drilling down into it, you're going to see something. Let's just take the topic of genetics for just a second. Look at there. There's a question from Larry Hardesty. I'll hit that one. Let's just take genetics. You know, it's real common to get a question from somebody in the South, Louisiana, Alabama, Texas, wherever, and they want to stock Florida strain bass. And the explicit reason they want to do that is to grow giant bass. That's why. They want to grow double-digit bass, and that's what it takes. It takes Florida genetics for the most part. For the most part. Now, it still gets complicated, which I'm not going to tackle. When I say that for the most part, I'm not going to dig into double-digit native or northern strain bass, but there are lakes that have produced double-digit northern bass. Now, you can expect those things to get to 8 pounds, where bass with Florida genetics can have the propensity to get much bigger, 12, 13, 14 pounds. So here's the way I want you to look at that. Just because the genetics are superior doesn't mean that fish is going to go to 10 pounds. Look at it like this. Let's say we got 2 championship AKC black Labrador retrievers, and they have a litter of 8 puppies. How many of them are great? Usually none. On occasion, there's 1 if it's trained well. How many litters have a run? Every litter has a run. So when you start looking, let's say there's 100,000 baby bass hatched in your lake. Half of them are boys. They're not going to get any bigger than 2 pounds for the most part in that lake. The other half, that other 50,000, are girls. And of those 50,000 girls, there's going to be about, let me think about it, 50, 10, that's about 10 to 15,000 of those girls will have the propensity and the aggressive nature to get large if they get the opportunity to not be eaten by a bluegill or another bass. So where I'm going is there's only about 30% of the females or 15% of the overall population of bass that has everything that it takes to be able to get to double digits. Now that sounds like a huge number, but when you're talking about baby bass coming off of a nest, they come off in a clump. And then anything that can eat them is after them, including each other. It's not unusual for a sister bass to eat a little brother bass after 4 or 5 weeks of being alive. I mean, I see that all the time. When I'm out surveying a lake, there'll be some, we call them jumpers, the faster growing fish. Even though those faster growing fish may not have the propensity to get as big as the fish they ate. Think about that. where when we're sampling, it's really common for us to catch like a 5-inch bass with a 2-inch bass's tail sticking out of its gullet. And so there's a lot to that. Brandon Coleman, bullfrogs are croaking in Yorktown, Texas. He heard me tell this story about Bus Hartley from Kingman, Kansas. If the bullfrogs are croaking, your bass are spawning, folks. I'm telling you, it's the truth. Bus Hartley told me that, and I tried to prove him wrong. He ain't wrong. He's right. So if you got bullfrogs croaking, you're going to have bass spawning. There you are. So what do I need to do to find out if my water is healthy? Also, can you talk about fertilizer for the pond? What and how does that help? Yeah, that's good. Good question. Good down-to-earth, logical question. Your water is healthy if healthy things are growing in it. Now, to find out, what I like to do, I like to see people have the water chemistry analyzed for a benchmark. And if you haven't done that, my favorite lab is Texas A&M University Soil Sciences Lab. If you go to the Soil Sciences Lab on the internet for Texas A&M, they've got forms for water testing. Do the $40 test. And if you can't interpret it, have them copy me on the email, and I'll help you interpret that. So that tells you what's in your water chemically. So it tells you what the calcium carbonate is. It tells you what a bunch of the cations and anions. Okay, so positively charged particles and negatively charged particles. It tells you what your alkalinity is. It tells you what your pH is. pH is a measurement. It's kind of like a ruler. How many inches is the bass? Well, the pH is 7 or the pH is 6. So the pH is an indicator of what's dissolved in the water, and it's a measurement. So the next thing I would do is monitor your water temperature. I pound this in everybody's head pretty much every time I talk about it this time of year. If you'll monitor the temperature influences what's going to happen in the water. So when the water temperature reaches a certain temperature, like at 610, I got a call from a guy. He said, man, I've got a friend. He's got a pond. It's full of all this slimy lime green stuff in it. Well, that's filamentous algae. It's that time of year. You're going to see filamentous algae because it starts growing when the water temperature hits about 50, 48 to 50. It's going to start to grow, where some of the other plants won't grow until the water is way up in the upper 50s or lower 60s. And so when you start checking the water temperature, and also check the visibility depth, buy a Secchi disc or make one. Put one on a broomstick. Keep it on the dock where you can use it. In a Secchi disc, the way you use it is you lower it. So a Secchi disc is a round disc. Just put a cross in it and paint opposing corners black. Leave the other two corners white. And then when you push it down under the water, you measure how far down it goes before it disappears. So you push it down or drop it down if it's on a chain or a cord. Drop it down until it disappears. Then pull it up slowly till you can see it. When you can see it, that's the visibility depth. And you want to look at that and write it down. Take some notes so you can compare week to week to week or day to day to day. And that's how to know that your water's happy. If this time of year, if your visibility is greater than 2 feet, that's probably normal. If it's 5 feet, that's some lakes, rock pits, and water with lots of gypsum or calcium in it, or limestone. Those waters can be highly visible. But if it's 24 inches, has a slight green tint, you may already have a plankton bloom. Hello, Jeremy Day. Good to see you. Mike Cottrell. Good to see you. So let me see here. All right, let me back up here. Okay, also, can you talk about fertilizer for the pond? If you're checking visibility, and your visibility is like, once your water temperature hits 55 to 60 degrees going up, that's the time to fertilize. Check your visibility. Now, you guys in northern tier states, like John Funk, I didn't see him on today, but don't fertilize northern tier states unless you talk to somebody about it first. Because you could cause a problem way down the line with water quality when you get to this little thing they call winter and ice. Ice. This is ice in Texas. If this were clear, you'd see ice to there with water. So, and it measures your visibility. So what you want to do is fertilize it, starting off with 3 or 4 pounds of phosphorus per surface acre if your visibility is 3 feet or greater. There's the caveat. So don't run out there and fertilize and call me when you kill your fish because you didn't listen to the caveat. So be sure that your water temperature is right and the visibility is greater than 3 feet, and then start off with 3 to 4 pounds of phosphorus. So depending on the kind of fertilizer you use, you've got to extrapolate how much to use. So if you're using 1137-0, for example, or 1034-0, whatever you're using, and be sure it's water soluble and it dissolves into the water. If you use liquid fertilizer, if that stuff is even still around, that stuff weighs 13 pounds per gallon, where water weighs 8.3, I think. So if you pour that fertilizer in the water, it's going to sink to the bottom and fertilize the plants coming up through the mud. So don't do that. So what it does is it stimulates the base of the food chain. So it's the food to feed the microscopic plants and animals called plankton. Zooplankton is animal plankton. Phytoplankton is plant plankton. Most of the phytoplankton is microscopic species of algae. And the plants feed the bugs, feed the parameciums and the daphnias and all that kind of stuff. All right, Steve Scharf. I'm confused on the F1 largemouth bass. A lot of reading I've done from the University of Google. We do a lot of that, don't we? Ooh, it ran off here. Okay. Indicate that it's a great way to get the Florida genetics further north, and it's directly disputed by others saying they won't really perform well. Your experience with F1s north of Oklahoma doing well? Yes, they are. And one thing you got to be careful about is some states don't want that genetic strain anywhere in their waters because that's an exotic species. Even though it's a largemouth bass, I know of several lakes in Nebraska, actually, that have got some FXs. I don't think they're F1s. So an F1 is a cross between a pure strain Florida largemouth bass and a pure strain northern largemouth bass. Now, pure strain Floridas are maybe 97% Florida. That qualifies as a pure strain Florida. It's not necessarily 100%, but none of us are either. I'm not pure strain northern. I'm not pure strain largemouth. I'm not pure strain anything. So when you cross those two, the first generation of babies are called F1s. Now, when those F1s begin to cross, they may be F2s, but they're probably going to be FXs. The best analogy I know to explain that is if you cross an Angus bull with a Hereford cow, you're going to get a black baldy. But if you cross two black baldies, what are you going to get? You're going to get some calves that are red, some that are black, some that have a white face, some that don't. So there. I don't want to talk about the fish in Nebraska because they were stocked there by accident. Well, the guy that stocked them actually caught them in a lake around Austin, Texas, and transported them in his live well and stocked them in his lake. And there's some fish up there that have made it, and I think he did that maybe 20 years ago. So I know that the genetics have degraded, but there's still Florida genetics in those fish, and they're huge. So now here's the catch. Pure strain Florida bass don't like cold. I've watched them, and when I had a hatchery, which was a lot of work, but it was worth it. You could actually take those Florida bass and put them in a vat of water, concrete vat, and as the temperature dropped, you could see them get so lethargic that they would end up laying on their sides, and they'd quit breathing. They just couldn't muster what it took to breathe, and they would suffocate if you left them like that. So I could kick on the water well, which was warm water, and they'd revive within 15 minutes after that water temperature goes back up. So they don't like cold water. Neither do copper-nosed bluegills because they're native to the southeast. So I hope that helps a little bit. All right, let me see here. How deep? Oh, that's a good question. Larry Hardsey, how deep do I check temperatures? Holy cow, I'm getting behind here. That's a good thing. It's already 7 o'clock. Hey, Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year. Cheaper than a Friday night date, and it lasts a year, and that date doesn't last but a couple hours. and good stuff in there. And the next issue is in the mail. The March, April's in the mail stream. It was mailed, I don't know, March the 3rd or 4th or something. We had to wait a little bit to get the resource guide finished. So it's going to be going. Oh, you know what else? Hey, oh my gosh, I need to tell you all about this. We've got the next Institute of Higher Pondology set, and it's going to be in May. And I've got to make a couple of phone calls. I meant to do that today, but I got sidetracked. And we're going to do it toward the end of May, and I've got to figure out which dates. But it'll be 2.5 days of hanging out with me and whoever else I can round up to come speak with some good hands-on stuff, some applied science at the Institute of Higher Pondology. And a number of you guys, Danny Max attended it. He knows about it. And so it's going to be at Bobby and Jacob West's ranch. Bobby and Jacob, father, son, near St. Joe, Texas. They've offered us their ranch. We can sleep maybe 10 people, 12 at the max. So we're going to have a small group. It's going to be $1,500, which is all in. That's food, housing, and all, the curriculum and all kinds of just swag and good food. I promise you, it's good food. And you're going to get to help cook. But we have a blast. Hello, Travis Smith. Okay, so how deep do I check temperatures? Start off at the surface, but measure the temperature, and depends on the time of day, but I'd go down about 2 feet. If you go down 2 feet and measure your temperature, that's going to give you a pretty good idea of what it is, but be consistent. And I would check it this time of year. I'd be checking it 3 times a week, and I do it at the same time. If you can do it at 1 in the afternoon, do it then. If you got to do it at 6 in the evening, do it then. But write it down, and I'd even put it in a spreadsheet so you can be tracking it, and that way you know. Fertilizer, I like to do the 10-34-0, a super triple phosphate. That's what you're looking for. You want the middle number to be 3 times as high as the first number. The first number is nitrogen. Very rarely is nitrogen the limiting factor. Phosphorus is usually the limiting factor. And it's really kind of ironic to be talking about that, because there's some states, especially the corn states, where phosphorus is so abundant that there's too much phosphorus. But in the southern tier states, when you put phosphorus in water, something's going to use it and something's going to eat that and turn it into flesh. And like I was talking about a while ago, 3 to 4 pounds per acre of phosphorus. So if you got 10-34-0 or 11-37-0, those are percentages. So it's if you got 10 pounds of fertilizer, 3.7 pounds of that's phosphorus. So you can extrapolate that. Travis, good to see you, buddy. Danny Mac and someone on the forum pointed out that you're actually looking at half the light penetration because the light you see had to get through the water to the Secchi disc. Let me think about that a minute. Pointed out that you're actually looking at half the light penetration because the light you see had to get through the water. Okay. I'm trying to understand that. Half the light penetration. Well, Danny, I'm sure I will never dispute you. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around that. I haven't had any stimulation other than water to be thoroughly soaked that in. Jim Allen, 2.5 feet Secchi and 10 C water temperature. Okay, I don't think in centigrade. So 10 C, 10, that would be, 45 degrees, 48 degrees? I noticed some of the rocks had bubbles on it. Is that the algae O2 starting to form? It could be. It sure could be. Yep. If there's rocks with bubbles, that's typically gas that's being converted right there. I could send you stars, but I don't know what they are. Dollars? Oh, I would. Yeah, I don't know how that works. Okay, let's see here. Wow. Jason Foley, I made it. Hi, Bob. Good to see you, buddy. Where's the best place to send water samples? Go to, I'm planning to restock. We want to make sure the water, yeah. Jason, I would send it to Texas A&M University Soil Sciences Lab. And just for the sake of knowledge, I like to use the Soil Sciences Lab and use the water test form. It's $40. I like that one. That's if we're checking basic water chemistry. if there's a fish kill and you can get water early, fast enough after the fish kills, then you could send that down to the Aquatic Diagnostic Lab, which is a different lab, which is in the Aquaculture Center down at A&M. And you should be able to find that. Look for the look on Aquaplant, and it's going to be in there. It's going to be, I think it's in Aquaplant, or you can look for Aquatic Diagnostic Lab, but I think there's a link on Aquaplant. Okay, let's see. Sammy Linderman checking in from Huntsville, Alabama. My daughter Sawyer, 5 years old, and myself are stocking our pond tomorrow. That's fun. Take pictures, man. Send me some pictures. Send them to info@pondboss.com. That's cool. Following your advice to a T. Perfect. Good. Hope it works. What purina food do you recommend for a newly stocked pond with bait fish? Look for Aquamax 500. And go ahead and call a Purina dealer and make sure they can get it. And if they can't get it, then look at MVP. MVP they can get. Danny Mac, we actually have spots in our bodies that majorly reflect the genes of a parent. We were all question marks. Yeah, that's right. That's from Sci America before it went woke. Okay. Yeah, I get that. I don't watch stuff like that anymore. Are green sunfish a problem? I used to think they were. I don't think so as much. Now, the reason I'm saying that is that green sunfish only reproduce once a year, and on a rare occasion they might reproduce twice. If they don't lay all their eggs in the first cycle of the spawn, the rest will get ripe and they'll spawn the second time, but that's not very common. So, and they're easy for a bass to eat. So I've taken, in the past, when I remember one pond in particular that was a dairy pond, about 3 acres. It was a dairy lagoon, and they had a fish kill. Well, they cleaned it up, dolled up the water, made the water better, and flushed it out with some good rainfalls, as I recall. But the fish that didn't die were the green sunfish, and they populated that thing within a year. So they wanted me to come shock it. I went down and electrofished it, and oh my gosh, that pond, 3-acre pond, had thousands of little 2 to 3 inch long green sunfish in it that were maybe a year and a half old. And so I got to thinking about it, and I thought, you know what, they can spend $1,000 in rotin on that, or they can spend maybe $1,500 and buy some bass big enough to eat all of those, and we could stock some larger bluegills. And it took only 2 years for those green sunfish to pretty much be extinct. Now the bass won't eat all of them, but since those bluegills spawn 4 or 5 times a year, and the green sunfish spawn once, maybe twice, you can kind of see how the numbers will change with attrition. So when those bass are feeding heavily on those fish, and they're only spawning once a year, they can't keep up. So I don't see them now. The way I see green sunfish, what I try to do is figure out what's the facts, present those to you, and then you decide if they're a problem. If its mouth opens upward, they usually are gleaning food from the water column, like threadfin shad. They're gleaning food from the water column. Gizzard shad, they have a mouth under here. They're bottom feeders. Carp, bottom feeders. Where green sunfish, they're predators. They'll eat a baby bluegill. They will eat little bass. They'll eat whatever fits in their mouth because that's what they do. Where a bluegill with a mouth that's about as big around as a number 2 pencil eraser, a green sunfish that size will have a mouth about 3.5 or 4 times that big around. You can probably fit 4 pencil erasers in it on a green sunfish. So they do affect the food chain, and therefore that could cause them to be a problem in your situation. But if you manage the dynamics of that fish population, then you can actually use them as food. And it's kind of fun sometimes just to catch a fish that you didn't expect. What in the hell is this? A green sunfish. Let's see what we got here. James Allen, my friend Jim Allen. Ever try to catch otters in a trap? Yes. We have 2, and they leave a pile of scales and bone scat all over the docks. Yes, they do. Hey, there's John Wilson checking in from Ohio. Good to see John. Dustin Crawley, good to see you. So Jim, what most folks do to trap otters is they either use a snare or they'll use a 330 conibear. And what you got to figure out is where are they coming. Otters are not the same creatures of habit as a beaver is, but they're pretty close to it. And I've trapped them with conibear 330s before. Once I figured out where they were entering and leaving. Now where they're leaving the piles of scales and the bone scat all over the place, that on your docks, that's just where they're having fun playing with the fish, and then they eat it, and then they're marking your dock, just so that the other otters will know, hey, stay away from this dock, this is mine, but they're typically entering and leaving the pond at the same place. And if you can find that where the grass is beaten down, there's a slide, a little muddy there, a little wetter there, that's a good place to set that conibear 330 right under the surface of the water where they're coming in, sliding into the pond. So, and if you've never worked with a conibear trap, you want to get a tutorial or get somebody to come do it and take you through that, because it sure will snap your dadgum arm. Scott, hey Bob, heading to the property for the first time this year to turn on the fish feeder. Water temperature is probably low to mid 50s. Would you start out with 2 or 3 feeds per day? I'd start with 1. When the water temperature is in the low 50s, start off with 1. Do it in the afternoon when it's warmest, and set it just to go off for a few seconds. Whatever feeder you've got, if you can throw out half to 3/4 of a pound of feed to begin, and then once you see the fish begin to eat it, then be there when you can and watch the feeding. And when they're cleaning up that fish food within about 30 seconds, 40 seconds, that's probably about right. The old school way of thinking is if they clean it all up in 5 minutes. Well, if it takes them that long, you're probably feeding a little bit more than you need to feed. Then I would feed them in the afternoon to start off. Let's see what else this says. Missouri, I'll be headed your way to Lake Fork. So I would set it to go off once a day to where it throws out about 3/4 of a pound of feed. That's what I would do. And then you'll start to see what's going on, and you can adjust it after that. Frank James, I saw the difference between somewhat managed and not managed at all at my favorite ranch pond in Texas. Used to be full of 4-pound plus bass, all the way up to 12 pounds. After a few years of no management, just a few giants, but the next generation is missing. All small stuff coming up. In 4 days of fishing, we caught only 1 2-pound bass. Most were less than a pound. That is really typical. That's absolutely typical. Peyton Igo, how do you feel about 0-40-60? I don't know. I don't think that's overkill. Just you got to measure how much phosphorus that is. So in 10 pounds of 0-40-60, that's truly pure phosphate fertilizer. That means there's 4.6 pounds in 10 pounds of fertilizer. Side note, the golden triangle of deer in the Midwest is said to be so good due to high phosphorus amounts in the ground in northern Missouri. Yeah, that, you know what, I could believe that. I could see how that would happen. And the phosphorus is actually, they're not eating it directly, they're usually gleaning it from browse, I bet. And it's because those plants that take it up, which most plants need phosphorus, and plants will take up what they need, and if phosphorus is lacking, then the plant growth is going to be lacking. But I could see how high phosphorus soils could be cranking out some really high powered, high protein acorns, You're welcome, Jason Foley. Justin Ludwig, is the bigger mouth gape on the green sunfish? Yep, I kind of hit that. Yeah, I kind of hit that. So mouth gape is important on all fish. So if you're really getting into this, if you're going to be a fish squeezer and really dig into the science of this stuff, it's important to look at that and then understand it. Because if you take a crappie and lay it right beside a warmouth or what they call a goggle eye, I think what do they call them in Louisiana? They're not chinky pin perch. That's a red ear. Maybe they are a chinky pin perch. They're called shell crackers. So if you take all these different sunfish and lay them side by mouth size, you're going to see they're all different. Red ear's mouth is a little bit bigger than a bluegill's. Bluegill's a little bit bigger than a long ear sunfish. The green sunfish has got a bigger mouth. The goggle eye or warmouth has got a much bigger mouth, and a crappie's got a bigger mouth. And the crappie's mouth is so big, it's too big to be small, and too small to be big. So that will tell you where those fish participate in the food chain. And as you think about that, then that helps you decide how you want to manage that fishery. Every bass was skinny. All those small ones were, I bet. I bet those big ones weren't. Neil Sperry, let's see, back up here, Bob, is a customer in Arlington Camera, and he always refers listeners to send specimens to him. Yep, I do too. Yep. Gil Cannonberg is retired from the camera business. If you want to know anything about cameras, he's the guy. Ben Arnold, could turtles pose an issue to a bass pond? I'll tell you what I tell people. If a turtle eats a bass, it's the bass's fault. Turtles don't really cause an issue other than if they're overabundant, they can disrupt spawning. They'll do it. They'll come root around in nests and disrupt the eggs and maybe eat some eggs. Now, I think it's a very rare occasion that turtles cause an issue, but I know this. At LL, before we sold it, there were several summers in our 3/4 acre swimming pond right by the house that I could count on any given day 30 turtles. And that the thing I don't like about turtles is most of the time I just consider them part of the deal. I just enjoy them. But if there's that many, they're eating your fish food, which that was what they were doing in our ponds because we fed our fish faithfully, and they would just come to that fish food, and it'd be like the whole dang neighborhood. All the ponds turtles came to our house for supper and decided they like it and they stay. But they can be a little bit of an issue when it comes to reproducing. They could disrupt nests, that sort of thing. Let's see, Clint Price for phosphorus reduction. Let me back up. Rock bass, there it is. That's what you call them. Which there is a true rock bass, by the way. That's what I was trying to remember. That's a Louisiana guy, Peyton Igo is. Clint Price, for phosphorus reduction, how many pounds of aluminum sulfate would you recommend per acre foot? pH is around 8, southeast Illinois. I don't know. How much phosphorus do you have? So the amount of phosphorus you got is going to help dictate how much alum that you use and whether you need to buffer it or not with hydrated lime. So I don't know the answer to that, but the people that make Phoslock and some of the other binders like that, to bind phosphorus, they're the ones that can have that answer. I don't know. I've actually never used it for that purpose. Jason Nepstad from Fayetteville, North Cackalack. Only if you have an automatic fish feeder, they eat as much as the fish do. I'm not sure what we're answering there. Okay, yeah, okay, turtles, got it. Yep, rock bass. Ken Weber, let me see here. Hello, Chuck Brinkman. Chuck sent me a cool picture of his daughters holding one of the most gorgeous bass you'll ever see. 1 year into a new pond in southeast Louisiana. Fatheads and copper nose are well established and reproducing. I'm adding 6-inch F1 tiger bass this week. Any disadvantage to adding 6 inchers? 2 inchers aren't available yet. The disadvantage is those 6-inch bass are a year old. That's the only disadvantage. So what happens at the hatcheries is they feed those fish well, but when they're crowded in a hatchery circumstance, which they have to be crowded, and they're all about the same size, it affects their growth rate. So what you'd really like in a perfect world is bass this age should be more like 8 to 10 inches long. So that's the only downside. They're still going to grow great. They're still going to thrive. They're going to do good. Let's see here. Yep. All right. You guys are having a conversation. Ken Weber, 1-inch copper nose that are 4 inches in 3 months. That's good. That's real good growth. That's rock solid growth. So let me think about what else I want to talk about. I don't see any more questions. Y'all pitch them in if you got one or two more. It's already 7:20. This hour, I swear it flies by. Let me see what else. You know what? If I really need to start getting a head count for the Institute of Higher Pondology. For those of you that are interested, send me an email, and then I'll get the details ironed out. Like right now, we're going to do one in May and one in October. And I know it's kind of short notice, but so what? That's what we're going to do. And we got room for 9 or 10 guys, up to 12, I think, and we can get that figured out. And we may do couples. So basically, there's 3 cabins, and there's a main lodge that got 3 bedrooms in it. So, we're going to have room for 10 to 12 people, something like that. Will creek chubs spawn in a pond? No, I don't think they will. Let me think about that, because I used to work with creek chubs a lot. I'll tell you what I've seen. I've seen creek chubs spawn in fairly decent sized lakes. I've seen them spawn fairly decent sized lakes, 20 acres, 25 acres. But what they typically want is they want a little bit of moving water in the spring, and they'll run up in that moving water and lay their eggs. But I'm absolutely confident they'll spawn in bigger bodies of water than a pond. That doesn't mean they won't spawn in a pond. I just don't think you'll see very many in a pond that's, say, half an acre or whatever. Jason Nipstad, if gizzard shad are eating off the bottom, are they taking much from the food chain that the threadfin feeds? No, not taking any. So here's the way that works. When a gizzard shad is first hatched, they do glean food from the water. So they're competing with little threadfin shad when they're first hatched. But once they get to be about 4 or 5 inches long, that's when they start hitting the bottom and they start rooting around in the mud. And they're called gizzard shad because they have a gizzard. So they'll get down and start just eating everything, gleaning everything they can off the bottom. And if you take a gizzard shad and cut it open and stretch out its intestines, it's like 2.5 times the length of the fish. Where if you take a predator fish, they have short intestines because they're going to digest, protein feed, where these gizzard shad they're feeding on the bottom are trying to glean insects and crustaceans and snails and, red worms, whatever's down in that mud, and they send a lot of mud through their digestive system. So they don't compete, and I tell you what they will do. They'll take nutrients from the water column and then help take them from the bottom and then help reintroduce them back into the water column. So in theory, with some reality to this theory, they can help fertilize the water to grow more food for the threadfins. So in that line of thinking, they're symbiotic for threadfins, so they don't compete. They compete for space. Now here's what gizzard shad will do. Once they reach a certain density, they start giving off a pheromone that is kind of a natural birth control pill, and it triggers those fish to not spawn very much. And that same pheromone can inhibit reproduction in threadfin shad as well. And I've read and heard that it can inhibit reproduction in some of the other species of fish as well. So there you go. There's a little tidbit. Justin Zipfer. I live in Missouri and have a super clear pond resulting in a lot of weeds and moss. I'm afraid to fertilize because of high nutrients. I'm also afraid to use dye and prevent blooms. Any advice? Yes. Start measuring your visibility. If your visibility is high, then you'll have a window to use a little bit of. Now, when you say high nutrients, I don't know what that means. I think I would check that. That's where a water chemistry test would be beneficial. If you've got high nutrients and there's some reason you're not getting a good plankton bloom. So I bet you may have high nutrients, but there's a nutrient that's missing that's the limiting factor. Most of the time it's phosphorus. So that's my advice to you, is get your water chemistry checked, and then let's figure out what to do with it there, and I'll help you with that if you want when you get it analyzed. If you're afraid to fertilize, it's because you don't know what nutrients you've got. So find out what nutrients you've got, then make that decision. Scott, when would you add Q-Treen Plus for filamentous algae? I do it first thing in the morning. I mean, when it first starts to grow, it won't kill coontail. Thinks the need to spray. Working on growing a shad and bluegill population. Oops, things are jumping around here. Where'd it go? Yeah, it won't. That algicides will not kill coontail. Okay, your visibility is high. Then if your visibility is high and you don't have the right combination of nutrients, that's why you don't have a bloom and your visibility is high. So I'd check and see what nutrients you've got. Now you might be confusing nutrients that are in the muck, in the mud that's growing the plants that you're talking about with nutrients that are dissolved in the water. That's the key point. Any experience on bass and bowfin cohabitation? Yeah, I've got a lot of experience on that. They do cohabitate. They live in similar habitat, except bowfin have a tendency to stay shallower when bass go deeper, and their reproduction is limited with the bass population. So the times that I've seen bowfin, they've been in acid water, tannic lakes, where I've seen most of them is in East Texas and then in North Carolina, where there's a lot of black water lakes. And they coexist really well. I kind of like them. So there you go. Well, all right. Well, hey, we're getting down to the end of the hour. You're certainly welcome there, Justin. But I do have some experience on bass and bowfin. The older I got, man, I became a fan of bowfins, which is crazy. Jason Nepstad lives, I think, Jason, if I remember right, your lake's like 125, 130 acres. There isn't much I can do on a lake this size to grow bigger bluegill, so maybe the gizzard shad are the best alternative. Anything I can do to improve gizzard shad spawn? I think that's removing a bunch of carp help. There's really not much you can do to improve gizzard shad spawning. They're going to do that on their own. Threadfin shad you could. There's lots of things you can do for threadfin shad because they lay their eggs on a substrate usually made of grass. But gizzard shad, this is kind of cool. A female gizzard shad can have 250,000 eggs. And when she lays those eggs and they're fertilized, they wish them luck. There's no parental care whatsoever. It's not like a bass sitting on the bed or a bluegill guarding a nest, but they spawn so many eggs and wish them luck. And then, if there's a good enough bloom, that's one thing you could do, which I don't know that I'd fertilize that lake, but if you've got a good bloom, which I think, if I remember right, that lake does have a tendency to have a good bloom, and that's why the threadfins are doing so well, then the gizzard shad are going to benefit from that. Jim Allen, haven't been able to find a source of walleye. Who did you suggest last month? I would call Nate Herman with Herman Brothers up in Peoria, Illinois. He's a pretty good ride from you, but I know that he comes down into Kentucky. So Herman Brothers, Peoria, Illinois, they have a website. Look up Herman Brothers, Nate Herman, and Nate's got a Facebook page. I think, wait a minute, does he? You know what? I don't think Nate may not have a Facebook page. Best way to get bowfin, just catch and relocate. There's no hatcheries that raise bowfin on purpose. So the best size, whatever you can get. So if you can catch some and relocate them, and you've got the right habitat for them and the right happy water for bowfin, then you can do that if you like. If you want to diversify your predator base, you can sure do that. So hey, we're coming up near the bottom of the hour. Remember, Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year, cheaper than a Friday night date. Yep. And this is the economy that fuels everything that we do. So heck yeah, all kinds of good stuff in it. Look at that. Fish food on the back. Almost looks like a real bag of fish food. So, hey, I'm going to cut out. Let you guys have a great rest of your Tuesday. And thanks for checking in and chiming in. I always appreciate the questions. It helps keeps me going. For those of you that want to know more about the Institute of Higher Pondology, send me an email, and I'll let you know all about it and give you some facts about it. And I'll get the dates hammered out, finalized, hopefully tomorrow, which I don't know why not. So until, there's another question right at the end. Is there any way to clear up a pond clay particles, I believe, with anything other than gypsum? Yes, there is. First of all, you got to know what it is. And then you need to do a little testing on it to figure out. But you can use alum, aluminum sulfate will do it, but you can also kill your fish with that. So you got to know what you're doing. So alum, gypsum can work, but you got to know your water chemistry. And you got to know why it's muddy. Is it muddy because something's stirring it up, or because the colloidal clay particles are so small that they stay suspended in the water? Sometimes limestone will do it. So typically in muddy water like that, the lime is high. Oftentimes there's some gypsum in it or some bicarbonate or something. So find out a little bit more about it. But the answer to your question is yes, there is. So hey, at 7:30, we're going to wrap it up. Adios for now. Thanks for checking in and watching the show. See you next Tuesday.